Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we'll get started in 30 seconds from now. All right, Eliana, should we get started?
Yeah, sure. Let's stick on time. I know everyone is taking some time out of their evening to be with us today. So let's hop to it. Hello, everyone. Thank you to all of you that are joining us this evening. I know time is precious and we really appreciate you being here today. We're going to be talking about how to hire a pod teacher safely. My name is Eliana. James, you heard from as well. I joined Scoot Education just about a year ago. I'm a fellow mom, like many of you out there, and also a former teacher. So I have a bit of insight from both worlds. And James, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm the CEO of Scoot Education and Scoot at Home. We started the business in California about 4 years ago, and I'm very glad to be talking to everyone here about all the lessons that we've learned in our business across employing hundreds, if not thousands, of teachers, and how to do that in a safe way that protects you as well as the teacher themselves.
Cool. Thank you, James. So I hope that we won't take more than about 30 minutes or so for this, you guys. So thank you for being with us. So if you don't know much about Scoot, like James mentioned, we've been in California for the last few years, but we're actually based we're part of a more global company, and we've been in the educational staffing business for 15 years now. First started in Australia, if you couldn't tell by James's accent, and also have now expanded into the United Kingdom and now California, even Northern California, San Diego. We're based in Los Angeles, as you can see our team photo over there. A lot of us are former teachers as well and parents. So, we have that relation here with you all as well. We know that this time has been really difficult for a lot of us. We've had to make a lot of decisions that have maybe felt rushed last minute, when the pandemic hit, forming pods when maybe this is the first time you've ever done something like that and you had to do so quickly. And so maybe some things were overlooked and decisions had to be made quickly. So we just hope that today you're able to gain just some insight on some of those factors that you may have missed. I think it's also important to note that, like James says, we're in California, so a lot of the laws and sort of legal information we're sharing today is really geared towards California. We can't really speak to out of the state. Is that right, James?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the advice we give today is applicable nationwide, but there are some specifics to California, and I'll try to point them out as we go along. And I also want to, just be clear that our business operates in California, so that's where we are most comfortable giving advice.
Yeah. So as James mentioned, Scoot Education, we actually have both two sort of services. We have Scoot Education, where we partner with schools to provide educators to some of the top schools across California. But now, just like many of you, when the pandemic started, we had to adapt and adjust. And so now we have Scoot at Home, which essentially provides the same top quality educators that would normally be supporting schools. They're now available as pod teachers. And, when we would normally be partnering with schools, which we still do, now we're able to support families like yourself and provide that same kind of service and collaboration with you. So if you're with us today, you likely have already thought about what your pod will look like. You may have already created your pod and are even maybe already in the day-to-day with it. If you haven't done those things yet, it's not a problem. I still think there will be some really great information for you today. But we do have some really great resources on our website. We have blog posts all about different kinds of things, like how to start a pod, what kind of factors to consider, just even outside of the legal things, just like social things to think about, how to make a pod function well for your family, because everyone's really different. And we also have free worksheets and templates, some of which we'll share during today's session, but some others that we won't go over today, but you can find on our website. They're free to download and use, so definitely encourage you to check us out at scootathome.com. But today we're going to focus on how to hire a teacher safely, how to protect yourself, how to hopefully reduce any risk of fines or anything like that, and also protecting your kids and the teachers that you're working with as well. So if we turn it over to James, he's going to start us off.
Thanks, Eliana. So as I mentioned a little bit before, and like Eliana explained, typically what our business does is recruit, employ, and place substitute teachers into schools up and down California. Like Eliana said, we had to pivot, and we now work with learning pods. And as the co-founder and the CEO of this business, making sure that our clients are protected, making sure that our teacher employees are protected, and making sure the business is not liable to risk is not something that I would say it certainly isn't a passion of mine, but as the person where in this business, the buck stops with me, I am ultimately responsible for keeping the business and our stakeholders safe. This is something that when we were talking about what to present, it was something that I really thought could be valuable to our audience today to understand how to safely hire a teacher. So when you're hiring a teacher, I believe there's two different avenues you could go down typically. And within each of those avenues, there are then sub options. And over the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to talk about each of these options and the pros and cons of each one. So the two main avenues, the first question you have to answer is, do you want to hire the teacher directly, or do you want to go through a company? And there are advantages and disadvantages to both options. If you choose to hire a teacher directly, there's really three main options under that category. The first one is to classify the employee as a W-2 employee, or what's also commonly known as a household employee. Most people on the conference today, on the webinar today, as probably a W-2 employee. You probably get that piece of paper in January every year, and you use it to file your taxes. The second option is to classify the teacher as a independent contractor, or also known as a 1099. And then the third option is to simply pay the employee, or I should say the teacher, in cash, which is certainly the simplest option, but is also the option that provides the most risk. And we hope that you, through watching this, if this is the avenue you take, you understand the risks involved and how to potentially mitigate them and get ahead of them. I'm sure that most people have paid a gardener or a babysitter or maybe a house cleaner in cash. So, it's a pretty common occurrence, but it also presents some significant challenges and risks. The other option is to use a company, such as Scoot at Home, And we will talk a little bit about what we do as a business at the end of the presentation and include a promotion for the people who make it to the end of the presentation. But I want to assure you, this webinar is not just about what we do. It's not a very long advertisement for us. We're just here to give the best advice we can to make everyone safe. So one of the main questions to ask your provider if you do go through a company is, are you classifying your teachers as W-2 employees or as 1099 independent contractors? Because there's very significant differences between those two. And even when you're using a company, there can be issues that arise for you as the client if a teacher is misclassified. Okay, so let's look at a few things to consider if you're hiring the teacher yourself. So that was the first branch that we looked at with the options of W-2, household employee, 1099, or to pay in cash. So a few things for you to do straight away if this is what you have decided to do, or you're maybe even already doing it because the school year has already begun. I would encourage you to learn a little bit about employment law, in particular AB 5, which is a really hot topic at the moment because it came into law at the start of 2020, primarily to fight, well, to force companies like Uber and Lyft to reclassify their drivers. But it also has massive consequences on teachers. If you plan to classify them as a 1099 independent contractor. I would encourage you, if you are classifying as a 1099 independent contractor, I would encourage you to consult with an employment lawyer, because the advice that we have received as a company is that a teacher really can't be classified as a 1099 independent contractor after the passing of AB 5. So if you choose to go down that route, I recommend talking to an employment lawyer to get their advice. Also, if you're going down the route of hiring your own teacher, definitely understand what taxes and filings you are obliged to comply with. If you are classifying the teacher as a household employee, then you have to also register a EIN with state and federal governments. You have to file quarterly tax documents with the IRS. And you also need to pay payroll taxes, also known as the nanny tax. So I encourage you to consult with an accountant on how to do that in a compliant way that doesn't cause an enormous amount of administrative burden for your pod or family. And then finally, and what I think is probably most important, is think about liability. Nobody wants to think about what could happen in a worst case scenario, but you really should at least put your pessimist hat on for a while and think about things like, what happens if my teacher who I've employed with cash or directly as a contractor or household employee, what happens if they fall over? What happens if they steal from me? What happens if they're stolen from? What happens if they injure themselves or injure a child? What happens if you choose that this employee is not the right person, not the right fit, and you want to terminate them? How do you make sure you don't get, let's say, a discrimination complaint against you? So think about these, and we're going to go into these in a bit more depth in a moment, but talk to your insurance broker. I'm sure you have household insurance. Talk to them about how to add a teacher to your insurance policy. Talk to them about whether there needs to be constant adult supervision in addition to the teacher themselves. Ask them if you need to get workers' compensation insurance. And also make sure that you get all pod members to sign an insurance waiver. That is absolutely critical, and your insurance broker can give you that waiver for them to sign. The other option that I mentioned is to use a company. So there's lots of companies out there that will either provide a teacher who is their employee, which is what we do. There are also companies that are more like a matchmaking service, and then it's still your responsibility to work out the employment aspect. If you choose a company, and there are a few out there, we are certainly not the only one, I encourage you to ask them about their liability insurance. As I mentioned already, how does the company classify their teachers? Are they a W-2 employee or an independent contractor? And make sure that the company does in fact take care of all of the taxes end to end, so that you don't have any issues with the IRS. I will say that over the last few months, a lot of companies providing this type of service have popped up. It's sort of become a cottage industry. So definitely do your due diligence. Make sure that you're seeing insurance documents to make sure that they're insured properly. Make sure that you're seeing workers' compensation documents to make sure that they've got that coverage in place. See if you can get a referral to a company that your friend or family member has used, so you know they're reputable. If a company has got no history and just popped up in the last couple of months, I would consider doing a deep dive in your research. And yeah, ask the company, where do they advertise to recruit teachers from? How do they screen their teachers? What type of criminal background check do they get? Which is something that we're going to go into in just a moment. Ask them how they go about scheduling your teachers and the interviews leading up to you choosing a teacher. And then make sure that the company that you choose has templates for you to use to define what your isolation agreement is with the teacher, what your isolation agreement is between families in your pod, and make sure that if you can, see the contract between the teacher and the employing company, because you want to understand what responsibilities you have in that arrangement. And any decent company will give you all of these documents. And Eliana is going to talk about some of the documents that you can download from our website a little later in the presentation. A few really critical things that apply to whether you employ the teacher yourself or you go through a company. And these are some of the most important things to consider when you're thinking about safety. In many cases, you are inviting effectively a stranger into your home to spend time with yours and potentially other families' children. In what we're seeing as well is most of the demand for our pod service is in the elementary grade levels. So we're talking about young children. So it is absolutely critical that you know who this person is, because in many cases, they are unsupervised by another adult in our experience. So the first thing to think about is background checks. And I will share that not all background checks are created equal. And I'm going to show you a very real example of that on the next slide. But if you're going through a company, make sure that that company are getting live scans done on their teachers. And the live scans need to be from the Department of Justice and the FBI with ongoing arrest notifications. If you're going through a company and they're not providing that level of security, I would strongly suggest you reconsider your choice. If you are now that live scan check is only available to companies who have been approved by the DOJ. So if you are employing the teacher yourself, I at least encourage you to get a different type of background check done. Checkr is a popular service, Checkr, checkr.com. That's a popular service that's inexpensive, and while not as good as a live scan, will at least give you some insight. The other thing you can do that's super simple is check this person's teaching history and their certification history on the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing website. This is free to use. If you just Google California CTC, you can do an educator lookup. If you have access to your educator's social security number and date of birth, that's ideal. And you can do what's called a secured search. And you will be able to see that person's teaching history. You'll be able to see that person's certification history and whether they have had a certification revoked, put on hold, or maybe if they have applied for a credential or certification and been declined it. This is also worthwhile checking even if your teacher says they don't have a teaching credential, because they might have had a teaching credential in the past, and you want to be aware of that, because if they're saying that they don't have one, but they used to have one, you might want to find out why a teacher hasn't renewed their teaching credential. It might alert you to some red flags, or at least yellow flags. Now, just a little side note on this. If a company is providing you a teacher and they say that the teacher doesn't need to be background checked or live scanned because the CTC has done it, that is not a satisfactory answer, because the CTC website is almost always 6 months behind, and even more so now because of COVID. So that's not a suitable answer. And then, yeah, I mean, just as when you're employing someone in a company, or if you're going for a job, you're going to ask for references. You should do the same with your teacher. Make sure you're getting professional references from teaching supervisors that they've had in the past. So just to give you a little bit of background, I've got probably another 2 slides to go on this topic, and then Eliana is going to talk about some more general safety practices that you can implement within your pod. So I mentioned before the importance of background checks, criminal background checks. So a couple of years ago, we had a situation where we received a background check from an applicant of ours, which had some concerning results in it. And I was interested to see the difference between a live scan criminal background check and an over-the-counter criminal background check that anyone can get. So on the left here is the over-the-counter check that anyone can get using a social security number. You can see here that it's gone through a lot of things that look good: sex offender search, global watch list, national search. All of these things are good. And we've seen that there is a county search that has resulted in this person having, we found out that this person has had their license suspended because of a DUI. That is something that you can, as a family, decide whether that's a disqualifying factor when you're considering a teacher. But just to be clear, this is what we got for the over-the-counter search. What we got for a live scan is what's going to show on the right side of the screen now. And you can see here that down the bottom, we can see the DUI and the driving suspension. But above that, we can see some more recent charges. And these are violent crimes that this person has been charged with. So same person, 2 checks done on the same day. Very different results. So that's why if you're going to use a company, make sure they get live scans. Okay, so to sort of recap everything we've just discussed, I believe that there's really 4 ways to consider employing a teacher. You could pay them in cash. You could 1099 them as a contractor. You could classify them as a household employee, or you could go through a company. Some things to consider of who's responsible for what when you choose one of these options. Think about your liability insurance. If you're going it on your own, talk to your home insurance broker. If you go through a company, make sure you see their documentation. Think about the nanny tax. Think about AB5. If you're 1099ing them, I'm going to suggest that they fail the AB5 test. If you are going as a household employee, you will be responsible for paying payroll taxes and taking payroll taxes out of the employee's pay every pay period. Think about pay and wage and hour compliance laws. So when do you have to pay overtime? When do you have to give meal breaks, rest breaks? Because the last thing you want is to employ a teacher for a couple of months in your home, and then all of a sudden you get slapped. You know, maybe you have a less than ideal parting of the ways with that particular teacher, and then a month later you get slapped with a wage and hour claim saying that the family that paid me in cash or as a household employee didn't give me rest breaks or didn't pay me overtime. Definitely a situation you want to avoid. Think about taxes and filings. If you want to go 1099, you will have to collect W-9 forms, and you will have to provide a 1099 form each year. If you go for a household employee status, massive compliance requirements, administrative requirements. The IRS says that it takes about 60 hours of administration each year to have a household employee. If you go for a company, ask them how they manage that. If you're going to household employ them, you're going to need a workers' compensation policy. Talk to your insurance broker about adding that to your policy. Criminal background checks. I've already explained why it's so important that you get a live scan. They are only accessible to companies. So think about that. Dismissal protection. Something that nobody wants to think about, because when you're hiring a teacher or early on in the journey, you think everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be great. You like them, they like you, everything's going to be fine. Well, what happens if your teacher, gets a job from a public school district, they decline it because they're in your pod, then 1 week later you fire that teacher because your kids' schools have gone back to in-person instruction? You might have a disgruntled ex-employee on your hands that may, find all types of ways to make your life difficult and go for some sort of settlement. I'll speed up the pace here. You want to think about whether the teacher has access to state benefits, so unemployment insurance, state disability insurance, family medical leave. If they are as a household employee, or if you go through a company, they will have access to these things, which is nice for them and is certainly an employment perk when you're competing for talent. And then obviously you got to think about the responsibilities of advertising, screening, interviewing candidates if you haven't got that far down the process yet. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is, remember that California is a very employee-friendly state. So the benefit of the doubt almost always goes to the employee. So think about that when you're considering your risk tolerance. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you. I'm going to be talking a little bit later, but with that, I will hand it over to Eliana.
Thank you, James. So this next piece is more so on how to decide on the safety within your pod amongst families. So both, in consideration of the teacher that you're working with, but also just each other, the other kiddos in your pod, including your own. So if we look at the next slide, there are a lot of things to consider, both what does safety look like outside of the pod and inside, especially considering COVID-19. So, I think overall, the general thing I want anyone to get out of this is it's so much better to think of these things and agree on them as a pod proactively than have to discuss these and reactively consider them because something's happened, right? Because something has come up and now you're like, well, what should we do? Are we all going to agree on the next protocol if one of our kids does get sick, if a teacher does fall ill? How are we going to prevent these things? We don't want to assume that everyone is on the same page. We want to make sure that it's clear because we want everyone to be safe, right? So things to consider outside of your pod, a lot to do more so with the adults, the parents and other people in the households that the kids are in contact with, including the teacher involved. You want to think about who are you gathering with when the pod is not in session? Where are adults traveling day to day for necessary chores and trips? Grocery stores, is everyone ordering groceries to be delivered, or are we all okay going to a grocery store? Are people going out to eat on the weekend? In some places restaurants are open for outdoor dining or even indoor dining with less capacity, but everyone has different levels of comfort with that. So making sure that you're all on the same page and clear about what that looks like. Are any trips coming up? Something to think about. The holidays, they're already starting. Halloween is around the corner. I know that's not a big, heavy travel holiday, but we do have other holidays coming up soon where typically, you gather with your extended family, you meet with friends, and it might be a good idea to think about that now. What is everyone planning, and is everyone okay with it? Because it does affect everyone in the group. Inside the pod, on top of just the classroom safety with your kids, are kids wearing masks or face shields? What does cleaning and sanitation look like? Who's in charge of that? If your pod is not just in one home, if maybe it's meeting in different homes throughout the week, how are you checking for symptoms each day? What does food look like? Who's providing lunch? Is it safe to bring food, delivered, or does it need to be cooked there? Is every child bringing their own lunch? How is everyone getting to the home for the pod? And even just thinking about, I've seen lately on Facebook, I'm a mom myself and thinking about how to keep my kids, my kid entertained as well. And I see some pods are going on like little field trips to the park. Or I know that there's close to me a science museum that has some outdoor space for people to meet. So is that something you're considering? Is that something the teacher is open to? What's the protocol around that, about leaving the home, maybe for like an outdoor experience? Just we want to make sure that if you haven't started thinking about these things, that it really would be beneficial for you, for your kids, for the teacher involved to really think about, what happens when someone might get sick, just a common cold or flu, or what happens if someone is exposed to COVID and does test positive. What is everyone going to do? What's the line of communication look like? I think something too, if we turn to the next slide there, James, the plans around COVID, everyone has different levels of comfort and, how strict they want to be with their own pod's isolation. You're talking about, however many kids are involved in the pod, all of the family members, that are living in the household with each of those students, and the teacher and that teacher's household as well, right? Who is that teacher coming into contact with? So, here's a great graphic just to sort of visualize and think about, where do you and the other adults that are part of your pod fall? You know, what kind of level of isolation are you all adhering to? And if you haven't had that conversation real directly, you probably should. And it's not always easy. And, you know, you may not be able to think of everything all at once, but the great thing is, if you turn to the next slide, if you do come up with some kind of agreement on paper that you can refer back to, that you can, you know, revise and adjust with each other, it just sort of brings a sense of calm and security. I know for myself, for sure, you know, knowing that all the parents would be on the same page, because should something happen, you know, I want to know what to expect. So we definitely recommend creating some kind of agreement between yourself and the families. And if you're not sure how to do this, we have a free template that you can use, both a type of pod agreement between the pod and the teacher, and also an agreement that you can use between families within the pod, because there's, you know, slightly different things you all need to consider and agree on depending on the relationship. So you can find those on our website, and we'll share them again towards the end of this as well. I think also it's shared in the little chat here. So definitely recommend you taking a look at those and use them as you like. Back to you, James.
Cool. Thanks, Ileana. And this is going to be the final section of the presentation before we opened up to any Q&A. We did get one question, which was, does Scoot pay if a teacher gets COVID? And the answer is yes. We provide all of our teachers with 2 weeks of sick pay that they can utilize if they are diagnosed with COVID, or even if they're told to quarantine.
Too good to laugh.
So just I'm going to spend a minute talking about Scoot at Home, which is our service. We operate in 2 different ways. One is if you have found a teacher, one if you need to find a teacher, and the other way is if you've already found a teacher but want to take care of some of the compliance issues that we've just discussed, while also controlling costs, because a pod is obviously an unplanned expense for most families. So if you need to find a teacher, we have a very simple approach to doing that. You can go to our website, which is on the chat box, and you can schedule a consultation with one of our consultants like Eliana, who's been co-presenting. And that consultation is 100% free. We then help you find a teacher from our network, somebody who is experienced and we have worked with previously. Then we will help you get together all of your agreements, the isolation agreements, the contracts, and you'll then be able to start your pod safely. And just in terms of our fees, you don't pay a cent until the first day of that pod. So the last thing I'll share is one way that you can have the best of both worlds. If you've already found a teacher and maybe you were planning to employ them directly, or you were maybe going to just pay them in cash, but you're now a little bit concerned about the risks involved in doing that. Maybe you're worried about not having the right criminal background checks. You're worried about what happens in the event of an incident, an injury. So this is one thing we can do, is if you've already found a teacher, you can bring that teacher onto Scoot's payroll. We will employ that teacher as a W-2 employee. You can decide what that teacher gets paid. We'll take care of the payroll and paying the payroll taxes. You will then be covered under Scoot's insurance policies, our payroll systems, as well as all the compliance that we go through to make sure that every teacher we work with has been properly vetted. And then, as I mentioned, we handle all of the taxes And we also handle all of the federal and state filings. So really all you need to do is find the teacher, or if you've already found them, introduce them to us. The cost for this is only $20 per day. That's it. So for the payroll, the compliance, the background checks, the state filings, etc., for you to have the peace of mind that if something goes wrong, you're covered, is $20 a day, plus whatever we pay the teacher, of course. So if that's something of interest to you, I encourage you to go to our website and make an inquiry, and we can get that process started and completed within 24 to 48 hours. All right, so that is the end of our presentation. Okay, so just as a recap, if you want to find out more about the things that we discussed today, go to our website, which is in the chat. It's www.home.education. All of the resources that we've discussed today are on the website to download for free. If you're interested in having a conversation about finding a teacher through us or having us hire your teacher, just make an inquiry and we will get back to you immediately. And also, if you just want to have a chat with us, all of our contact details are on the website. There's also a really great blog on the website with tons of resources, from the serious to the more exciting, such as some Halloween costume ideas that are COVID safe. So check out the website, it's in the chat. And thank you very much for giving up a portion of your evening to listen to this presentation. All right, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and good luck with your learning pods. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Eliana.